Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the mind-bending world of Dan Ariely's research on human behavior. You know, we all like to think of ourselves as incredibly logical beings, right? We think we make careful choices based on facts and data. But, as we're about to see, the truth is that we are constantly being pushed and pulled by invisible forces that lead us to make completely irrational decisions. But here is the absolute wildest part. We make these irrational choices in entirely predictable ways. Let's actually start with a pretty intense, deeply personal story. Years ago, an accident left Dan Ariely with severe burns covering 70% of his body. He ended up spending 3 agonizing years in a hospital recovering. And during those 3 years, the absolute worst part of his day, the part he dreaded the most, was the daily bandage removal. Because peeling bandages off skin is one thing, but taking them off raw, burned flesh, that is an excruciating, unimaginable level of pain. So his nurses, who meant well, obviously, they insisted that ripping these bandages off as fast as possible from feet to head was the absolute best way to go. The process took an hour, and Dan would literally beg them to try something different, to just go slower. But the nurses were absolutely certain their way was the right way. Well, years later, when Dan became a university researcher, his experiments proved that a slower head-to-feet method with occasional breaks would have caused significantly less overall pain. The nurses, despite all their experience and good intentions, were completely wrong. They were making a predictably irrational decision. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover the pain of irrationality, the truth about relativity, the procrastination problem, social versus market norms, and finally, how we can actually become predictably rational.
All right, moving into section 1, the truth about relativity and pricing tricks.
Picture this. Dan's browsing the web one day and spots this actual magazine subscription ad with 3 options. Option 1 is a web-only subscription for $59. Option 2 is a print-only subscription for $125. And option 3 is a print and web combination subscription, also for $125. Dan decided to test this on 100 university students to see how people process these bizarre choices. Because, let's be real, option 2 seems incredibly stupid. Who on earth would pay for just print when you can get print and web for the exact same price?
Well, the results were super interesting. Out of 100 students, 16 chose the $59 web option. Absolutely 0, nobody at all, chose the $125 print-only option. And a whopping 84 students jumped on the $125 combo option, leaving that seemingly useless second option with exactly 0 takers.
Now, you might be thinking that second option was just a typo or a dumb mistake by the marketing team. Actually, scratch that, it was totally intentional. It's a highly effective pricing strategy known as a decoy. A decoy basically exploits our brain's habit of comparing things to figure out their underlying value. See, we don't naturally know what a magazine subscription is intrinsically worth. We only understand its value relative to something else.
Just to prove this wasn't a fluke, Dan completely removed that useless decoy option and ran the exact same test again. Just web for $59 or the combo for $125. Boom! The results completely flipped. This time, 68 people went for the cheaper web-only option and only 32 chose the expensive combo. By simply removing that decoy, people's perceived value of the options changed entirely. It's wild. We really don't know what things are worth without a comparison.
It's literally a psychological illusion. It works just like the famous orange circle illusion, where an object looks bigger or smaller depending entirely on what it's sitting next to. In reality, those central orange circles are perfectly identical in size. But if you surround one with giant circles, it suddenly looks tiny. Surround the other with tiny circles, and it looks massive. The exact same mental trick applies to how we perceive price tags and value every single day. Moving right along to section 2, the procrastination problem, or how we completely fail at managing our time. Dan decided to test our time management skills with another experiment on his students. He assigned 3 major papers to 3 different classes, but he changed up the deadline structure for each one. For Class A, he let the students pick their own deadlines at the start of the semester. For Class B, he gave absolutely no deadlines. All 3 papers were just due on the very last day of class. And for Class C, he assigned 3 strict, spaced-out deadlines throughout the semester. The outcome here is pretty staggering. The class with the strict professor-assigned deadlines, Class C, absolutely crushed it. They got the highest final grades. Class A, the ones who set their own deadlines, came in second. And Class B, the class with total freedom and no deadlines until the end of the year, they performed the absolute worst.
Left entirely to our own devices, we are incredibly bad at managing our time. These results are basically a textbook demonstration of Parkinson's law. You know the saying, work expands to fill the time available for its completion? It just shows that if we give ourselves 2 whole weeks for a super simple 1-week task, we are predictably going to stretch it out, overthink it, and, let's be honest, procrastinate until the very last second. So, what's the practical takeaway for us? Well, since we know we're going to irrationally delay things, we have to outsmart ourselves. We need to artificially limit our time and attach really strict penalties to hack our own procrastination. Like, if you want to go to the gym more, you can't just say, "Oh, I'll go eventually." You need to set a strict deadline and tell your friends that if you don't go, you owe them an expensive dinner. You kind of have to create artificial pain to force your irrational brain into getting things done. All right, Section 3, Social versus Market Norms and the Invisible Rules that Govern Us. I want you to imagine this scenario for a second. You're walking down the street, and a stranger asks for a quick favor to help carry a heavy box to their car. You're a nice person, so you say sure and you help them out. You put the box in the trunk, turn to say goodbye, but instead of simply saying thank you, the stranger reaches into their pocket and hands you a tiny bit of cash, say a 10-rupee note, basically just loose change. Honestly, how would you feel? You'd probably feel deeply insulted, right? But why is that? Here's why. We essentially live in 2 entirely distinct parallel worlds. On one side, you have social norms. This is the warm, fuzzy world of humanity, doing favors for your friends and acting out of the goodness of your heart with absolutely zero expectation of getting paid. On the other side, you have the cold, calculating world of market norms. This is the realm of business, money, strict exchanges, and hourly rates. When you carried that box, you were operating in the social world. But the second they handed you loose change, they forcefully dragged you into the market world. Dan actually tested this with a group of highly paid lawyers, and the results are fascinating. He asked one group if they would work for a massively discounted, cheap rate to help out struggling retirees. Operating under market norms, almost all of them said no. It just wasn't worth their time. But then he asked another group of lawyers to do the exact same work for completely free, as an act of charity. Operating under social norms, almost all of them eagerly volunteered and said yes. It just goes to show how incredibly dangerous it is to mix these 2 worlds together. Substituting a market transaction into a social relationship can permanently ruin the whole dynamic. Think about it. If you invite your mother-in-law over for a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner, and at the end of the meal you pull out your wallet and offer to pay her for her cooking, you have just instantly destroyed a social norm with a market norm. And trust me, that Thanksgiving is not going to end well for you. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, becoming predictably rational and taking back control. As we've seen, our brains are constantly being manipulated by relative pricing, open-ended timelines, and shifting social rules. But simply being aware of these hidden forces, that is a total game changer. Once you recognize the decoy pricing at a coffee shop, you suddenly have the power to change course. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. Knowing what you know now, what predictably irrational choice did you make today without even realizing it? Think about it and start making better choices tomorrow.